Good morning, and thank you for being here on this Friday morning in Michigan's capital city. We're here to discuss the latest information on the state school reform office and reports of potential school closures in districts like Lansing across the state of Michigan. The school reform officer from the Department of Technology, Management, and Budget has refused to meet and openly share information about their plans to attempt to close schools in Michigan and Lansing specifically. This is a troubling lack of transparency that compounds the mistrust of the process used to create the state's top-to-bottom list. We in the Lansing School District know that our students have made great progress in the face of many school improvement challenges, and we have a responsibility to be open and transparent with our families. We expect the same from our unelected state officials. The timing of this certainty comes at a very important moment for our district and many districts across the state, as hundreds of families are preparing to make school choices, and these rumors hurt that process and the districts. The School Reform Office has threatened to close as many as 100 schools statewide, and this action has been questioned by education leaders across the state of Michigan. Here to talk a little more about that with us today are Representative Andy Shore from Lansing, State Representative Tom Cochran from Lansing, our State Senator Curtis Ertel, and State Representative Adam Zemke from Ann Arbor, the Minority Vice Chair of the House Education Committee. Joining us at the podium today are Don Watruba from the Michigan Association of School Boards, Kathy Basile Cunningham from the Michigan Association of School Administrators, board members Rachel Lewis, Brian Beverly, and Amy Hodgen, and of course our Superintendent Yvonne Kamal-Kanul. I'm going to turn this over to Representative Shore.
Well, thank you, Peter. I appreciate it. I would like to point out that we started right at 10:15, Lansing schools, right on time. You know, this issue is really frustrating. I serve on the Education Committee, and I know Representative Zemke is going to get into some of that from his perspective, but I'm not only a state representative, but I'm a parent. I'm a parent. Both my children are in the Lansing schools. My son is going to be going to Everett School District, and it's ludicrous to me to think that here we are, you know, the end of August, and the School Reform Office is now looking at schools, looking at these 100 or so schools, 8 or so in Lansing, and deciding which ones that they might close. That's crazy. You know, I'm a parent. I've got a kid going to one of these schools, and I need to know. I need to know what they're thinking. I need to know what they are putting in their analysis. When you look at our school list, so Rio Elementary, Kavanaugh, Averill, North, these are all on the south side of Lansing. What's going to happen to those kids if you close those schools? Are they talking to Holt? Are they talking to other Lansing schools? What's going to happen? Well, we don't know, because they won't meet with our school district. Why? Why won't they meet with our school district? Because we want to bring an attorney to make sure that what happens is legal? What's wrong with that? Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't they have an attorney there to explain how what they're doing is allowable under the law? That doesn't make any sense that they would say, we refuse to meet with you because you want to have an attorney there. That's what it said in the State Journal yesterday. That's what their school reform officer was quoted as saying. That's ludicrous. How do we as parents deal with that? How do I know that if Everett is on the list, my son is going to the new tech program next year? This is a program with a wait list. This is a program where we had to go early to sign him up to make sure he gets in. Is that part of the calculation? Are they calculating the fact that Lansing as a community passed a bond and Lansing Eastern is going to get upgraded, we're going to have a new building? Are any of these things being calculated? We don't know, because they won't meet with the school board and with our superintendent. So this is all very frustrating. Here we are on August 19th. And parents are making decisions. They have signed their children up. I have, and so many others have here in Lansing and all across the state. And for the school reform office to come in and say they're going to start making these decisions even as of September 1st, that's just crazy. I cannot imagine a worse way for parents to start out a school year, for kids to start out a school year, to find out on September 1st that the school that they're supposed to be going to right after Labor Day is closed, and now they're going somewhere else. That, to me, is the worst thing we can do for our children, and I can't believe the governor's office hasn't stepped in to take control over this. Clearly, you know, we'd love to see the State Board of Education involved, but they're not, because the governor moved the State Reform Office over to his office. The whole thing is just crazy. And this is where government is failing parents and students at the state level. Everything that our Lansing School District Board and administrators is trying to do is on the up and up. Let's meet with them. Let's have that conversation. And I'm here to call on the School Reform Office to have that conversation with my Lansing School District Board and with schools all across the state. And if they're not, then we'll call on the legislature to try and take some action legislatively to require it. Thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Senator Hertel.
Thank you, Representative Shore. I stand here today with a feeling of frustration that is all too common with this governor and this administration. There's a lack of communication, and more importantly, a lack of willingness to listen to those that are closest to the problem. We have seen this time and time again in our state. And they only offer top-down solutions. We've been promised that those solutions will bring a brighter future. We are given half-truths about the intent of policies, and we are left to deal with too frequently devastating consequences of their failure. Public education is a right, one which those currently in power seem willing to ignore. We are too easily swayed by models of efficiencies and spreadsheets and streamlining, too taken by the buzzword of school choice, to realize that for a choice to be legitimate, it must be freely made between two viable options. You can't destroy one option by underfunding it and still call it a choice. But that is the case too often in many of our districts across the state. We are left with a list of schools who are told that they will be given more time to adjust to the new standardized test, time better to prepare their classrooms. These schools are overwhelmingly the same schools who have seen drastic reductions in funding and already serve low-income neighborhoods. After the Coleman Report in 1966 was released, sincere effort was made across this nation to close the racial gaps in our public schools. It has proven to be fruitful. While still imperfect, differences in performances across students of different cultural and ethnic backgrounds are narrowing. What is alarming is that the inverse is true for students of varying socioeconomic status. The gap in test performance between students from high-income districts to low-income districts has widened over the last 40 years. Schooling in low-income neighborhoods, then, is critical. We must invest in these neighborhood schools. We must do whatever we can for education to be the great equalizer it was intended to be. Public schools in the state of Michigan have been put through the ringer with policy after policy, mandate after unfunded mandate. Teachers are stuck working in a way that their students are merely prepared to take tests rather than to go out in the world and succeed. And they're threatened with closure if the test scores don't turn out right. Meanwhile, charter schools are allowed to go unchecked and do not face this daunting future, where jobs and our kids' futures hang in the balance. Education cannot and should not be run like a business. It is baffling to me that after the emergency manager referendum, after Flint, after the crisis in the Detroit public schools, that anyone could still believe that people are products and that this system is working. Instead of investing in more bureaucracy, more CEOs, what we need to make sure is that we're investing in our kids, not this failed system. I have a different suggestion for them. Let's invest in our schools. Place money where it matters in districts. Show kids that just because you come from an area where many have forgotten them, that does not mean that we have forgotten them in our state. Education is a right. Equitable, equal, quality public education is a right. While standardized test scores may serve as one way to evaluate the efficiency of a given curricula, they cannot and should not be used as a sole determinant in whether or not a school is allowed to remain in existence. This is particularly true in the years immediately following a massive shift in content and the type of testing handed down by the state. Quick solutions sound good, but quick solutions will never be the answer. Time and effort will. Don't close buildings. Invest in those who will truly make a difference. Allow teachers more autonomy to follow the path their students are on instead of being terrified of test score averages. We can do better. We must do better. I will now turn it over to Adam Zemke, the Minority Vice Chair for the House Education Committee.
Thank you, Senator Hertel, and my colleagues from the House, Andy Shore and Tom Cochran, as well as the Lansing officials who invited me today. I want to start off by saying that I had a conversation with Director Baker last night. And part of the reason that I set this conversation up was two parts. One, I, just like many of you, learned about this via the news. The legislature was not informed that this was going to happen. Nobody knew. And then secondarily, the conversation was set up because I found it very troubling that the director would not meet with local school officials. I told her communication is key in this endeavor. And if she needs to have the governor or the Department of Technology Management and Budget or somebody else appoint an attorney to go with her in order for her to feel comfortable to make these meetings happen, then she needs to do it. Because not meeting with school officials when they are exercising their right to bring legal counsel on a legal issue is ridiculous. I want you to think about three things here when we're talking about school closure: data, consistency, and transparency. None of those things are being considered in due form when we're talking about what the school reform office is announcing. You have two assessments, as Senator Hertel mentioned. Let's not even bring up the fact that the Department of Education informed school districts that they would be held harmless, which is the right thing to do when you switch assessments after you switch educational standards. You have two assessments, 3 data points that determine whether or not there's going to be a state takeover, at best, if you will, or the school being closed by the state, at worst. 3 data points, 2 of which are completely independent of one another. Does anyone think that that is enough data to dramatically change the lives of these students in their communities and their families? I don't. Consistency, complete lack of it. The sections of law that empower the State Reform Office with these powers, Section 1280C and 1249, are very broad. And they do not outline a process by which schools have metrics to know what they are held accountable for, and by which they will be judged so that they can improve. So if you're going to hear from anyone involved in this process that there's a process, trust us, that's not accurate. There's not a process outlined. And it's imperative that school districts understand what the metrics are so that they can meet those metrics. Everyone here wants these students to succeed. I feel confident in that. But if they don't know what they're going to be judged by in order to stay open, how can they ever meet those goals? And the third thing is transparency. There is none. The fact that this was announced, that some unknown number of schools are going to be closed, we still don't know how many that is. We still don't know by the process by which they're going to be judged by. That's not a transparent process. The only thing that's going to do is, as schools are getting ready to open and parents are getting ready to send their kids to prepare them for their next steps, it's going to send all of that into confusion and worry. That is ridiculous and should not be accepted by any state-level official. There's a big problem here. What's going on with the State Reform Office, this unaccountable behavior, has got to stop. We have to communicate with our schools, and it is my hope that after the fact that Board President Spatafor and the Lansing school officials have called and called and called on the State Reform Office to communicate, to talk with them, that this will actually happen. I've had that conversation. I know my colleagues in the legislature are having those conversations. It has to happen. There cannot be decisions about our kids' futures made behind closed doors and with smoke and mirrors. That is unacceptable. Thank you very much for having me today, and I'm going to turn it over to some officials from MASB.
So change of plans. We're actually going to introduce our superintendent, Yvonne Kamal Kanul, to speak on the data at the Lansing School District.
Thank you, President Spatafor, and I'm so glad to see all of you here today. The data that I'm going to speak to is the data from the heart. We've seen a lot of press lately about quote-unquote failing schools, and I want everyone to know here in Lansing that our beautiful state's capital here in Lansing, that I don't see failing schools in Lansing. I see staff and students and parents who work hard every day to bring the best to this community. I see kids that are happy and engaged in their learning. I see teachers, great teachers, who invest every ounce of their being into providing excellence for their students. And I want to make sure that I introduce and thank Chuck Alberts, who's the president of our Teachers Association. Thank you, Chuck, for being here. Very important to have the support of those people who have the point of contact in the classroom. They're the ones that we should be thanking for the work that they do. I see parents who want the best for their children and who have been so supportive of their schools, the ones that are on this list, and our community, our whole district. I see a city that has successfully emerged from a long sleep, awake and aware, ready to face the challenges head-on through creativity, passion, and dedication. There isn't a single shred of research that suggests that closing a struggling school is the right or best decision. Real educators are not in the business of telling anyone they're failing. We're in the business of inspiring, supporting, and encouraging, and putting children on a road and a path to their promise. To be clear, no one in this district is afraid of accountability, but we are afraid of the criteria by which we are judged because it's flawed, it's fleeting, and it's capricious. We welcome the opportunity to meet with the State School Reform Office. They are good people who are trying to implement an ill-conceived law with no process. There is no doubt we can learn much from each other. Just to be clear, we in the Lansing School District are here for the long haul. This is where we're from and where we plan to stay, continually improving to make this the best place for our families to live, work, and learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. Before we close, I want to thank everybody that was here today. Also, just reiterate that we are eager to meet with the State Reform Officer. We will make time for that meeting to happen. And if that meeting can't happen, we invite the State Reform Officer to join us at our information study session on September 8th in this room at 6:30 p.m. This is information the board should study, and we will hold a place on the agenda for you to present that information. Thank you very much for being here today. We'll now take questions, if there are any.
I've got one. Kyle Lynn from Merce. To the lawmakers, that you guys would concede that the law does lay out a path to close schools that aren't meeting test scores, right? I mean, you could argue the State Reform Office is just following the law by going down the avenue of closure, which they've had the power of doing for years.
So there is, yes, my apologies. Kyle, as I mentioned, there are two sections of the law that outline the powers of the State Reform Office. And you're correct, they have the ability to close schools, at least in certain areas of the state. I think it is to be determined as to where around the state those powers lie or are able to be used. There's some clarity, I think, that needs to be provided. From what I understand, I'm not an attorney, so don't ask me to make a technical judgment on that. However, It doesn't require that the State Reform Office simply close schools based on the test. And as we've seen with other accountability measures, the evaluation law, for an example, we always see that testing is not a factor to make high-stakes decision while you're changing the test. That is one of the most troubling things, I think, is all of these decisions, although they're outlined in law, they have the ability to happen, they require data, and there's not sound data here by which the State Reform Office is exercising to make these decisions. This is a very high-stakes decision. So, yes, there's a path, there is not a process, and there is no communication or clarity between the State Reform Office and the local districts.
Requested meetings with Ms. Baker. I mean, at this point, our understanding is Ms. Baker has made requests initially from her office to do the meetings and has since backed out of a number of those. And other districts, I can't give you a number, have followed up to say we're willing to meet. Most of them, where it seems like the problem existed, is, as was pointing out, they've wanted an attorney in the room so that they know what the process is and have a good understanding, and that's when she's backed out and then stepped away and has not rescheduled. And even with districts that have reached out to say we're ready, we'd meet at any time. But I don't have a firm number on how many that is. And she reached out to 184 buildings, approximately 40-plus districts. I know some of them happened without attorneys, so that is ongoing. I've talked as recently as this week with a couple of those. But I know for any that wanted to have an attorney present, and we actually as an association said that is a valid thing to ask for, that those meetings, none of them to my knowledge have happened.
Rick, I wish I could answer that question, but they won't share with us what they're trying to do, so we can't make a judgment as to whether or not there will be legal action required.
But, Peter, why would you want the attorney?
Because we're talking about a very complicated law that affects hundreds of students in our district, and we want to make sure we get the T's crossed and the I's dotted. I think it's a responsible action to have someone there who does understand the law much better than we do. Our superintendent's not a lawyer, she's an educational expert. So I want her in the room to understand the education component. I want the lawyer in the room to understand the legal parts. All right, looks like that's it. We all thank you very much for being here. Please enjoy the cookies.